In a Montana blizzard, an old couple knocked on the last lit door in the mountains after their own children threw them into the snow. Inside waited a retired Navy SEAL, a German shepherd with a scarred ear and a silence trained by war. Outside, headlights died among the trees, and someone came looking for the papers in Martha's trembling hands. Snow came down over Whitefish, Montana in thick white sheets covering the black pines until the mountain looked less like earth than a sleeping animal under a wool blanket. North of town, where the paved road narrowed into a Forest Service track and the last mailbox stood half buried in powder, a cabin kept one square of amber light against the storm. Caleb Mercer, 39 years old, tall and broad-shouldered with short dark brown hair, gray-green eyes, and a small scar near his left temple, stood at a workbench beneath that light and listened to the night argue with the walls. He wore a charcoal thermal shirt under a moss-green flannel, heavy work pants, snow boots, and an old military watch whose face had been scratched in places no story should have to go. Once he had been a Navy SEAL. Now he tested winter rescue radios for the volunteer search teams around Flathead County because storms had a way of finding the weak places in people and equipment, and Caleb had learned to respect anything that could do both. A rugged laptop sat beside a weather log, a hand-crank transmitter, a stack of labeled batteries, and a map of the ridge marked with pencil lines and tiny red flags. Near the stove, Chief watched the room without seeming to watch it at all. The German shepherd was 7, sable-coated with a black saddle down his back, a dark muzzle, and one ear nicked near the tip. He had the heavy chest of a working dog and the grave patience of a judge who had already heard most human excuses. His rear legs stiffened in cold weather, but he never complained. He simply rose slower, as if to remind Caleb that dignity was a thing best carried quietly. The wind threw snow against the shutters. The cabin creaked, settled, and held. Caleb wrote the time in the log, then paused when Chief lifted his head. Not fast, not frightened. Certain. The dog's ears angled toward the front door. Caleb waited. 3 seconds later came a knock so soft it might have been a branch, except branches did not knock twice. Wait, and knock again with less strength than before. Chief stood. A low vibration began in his chest. Caleb turned down the lamp, took a flashlight from the hook, and moved to the side window first because the front door was what strangers expected a man to check. He wiped a half circle through the frost. 2 figures stood on the porch, bent into the wind, snow crusted along their shoulders and hats, their bodies pressed close like the cold had tried to separate them and failed. The man was thin, white-haired, with the hard hands of someone who had spent a lifetime measuring boards and carrying lumber. The woman beside him held a square tin box to her chest under her coat, as if it were warm enough to keep her alive. Caleb opened the small viewing panel set into the door. "State your business," he said, not loud because loud wasted air. The old woman blinked through blowing snow. Her face was pale. Her silver hair tucked in a loose bun under a knit cap, and her lips trembled before words came. "Sir, please. Our car died down the hill. My husband is freezing. We saw your light." The old man lifted his chin, pride dragging itself upright even while his knees shook. "We don't mean trouble." His voice cracked on the last word. "We just need to get warm enough to think." Chief stepped close to Caleb's leg and pushed his nose toward the seam of the door. He drew in the air. Snow, wool, old leather, medicine, fear, and something else. Paper, cold metal, a trace of diesel. Caleb did not open the door yet. "Names?" The woman swallowed. "Martha Bennett. This is my husband, Arthur." Arthur tried to smile, but it came out crooked. "I would tip my hat, but it may be frozen to my head." The little joke landed in the storm like a match trying to burn underwater, and still it burned. Caleb studied their hands, their boots, the way Martha held the tin box. The way Arthur leaned subtly toward the doorframe without touching it because he did not want to appear weak. Then Arthur's breath hitched. His left hand tightened against his coat near his ribs. Caleb saw that. Chief saw it too. The dog's growl softened into a worried hum. Caleb slid back the bolt, then the second lock, then opened the door in one controlled motion. "Come in slowly." Martha stepped over the threshold first, nearly falling when heat struck her face. Arthur followed with small, stiff steps, snow dropping from his cuffs onto the plank floor. Chief circled them once, close enough for his whiskers to brush Arthur's pant leg, then returned to Caleb's side and sat between the strangers and the door. Not rude. Clear. Caleb closed the door hard against the wind and set the locks again. The cabin took them in with the smell of cedar, wood smoke, coffee, oiled tools, and dog. Martha clutched the tin box tighter. Arthur stood too straight, then swayed. Caleb caught his elbow before the old man could pretend nothing had happened. "Chair by the stove, now." Arthur opened his mouth. Chief looked at him. Arthur sat. "That dog has opinions," he muttered. Martha gave a breath that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. "So did my mother." Caleb pulled 2 wool blankets from a cedar chest and wrapped one around Arthur's shoulders, then offered the other to Martha. She took it with a small nod, but her eyes stayed on the locks. Not the kind of look a person gave a stranger's house. The kind a person gave a door they feared someone else might come through. Caleb noticed her fingers. They were stiff red at the knuckles and still guarding the tin box. "How long were you outside?" "I don't know," Martha said. "Time got strange in the snow." Arthur looked at the floor. 20 minutes, maybe more." "Maybe more," Caleb repeated, hearing the lie of a man trying to protect his wife from the size of what had happened. He set a kettle on the stove and reached for his first aid kit. "Phone." Martha lifted a small cell phone from her pocket. The screen was black. "It worked before we left the house, then nothing. Arthur's too." "Battery. Half charged when we got in the car." Caleb took it, thumbed the button, and got nothing. He placed it beside his own radio and watched the meter needle twitch, then sink. The storm could kill signal. It could bury towers in static and make good equipment act foolish. But this was clean. Too clean. Behind him, Martha whispered, "Our son said no one would come for us." Caleb turned slowly. Arthur's jaw tightened and Martha looked down as though ashamed to have spoken. Chief leaned toward her, nose touching the edge of the tin box. He did not paw it, did not push. He only breathed once, deep and careful, then looked toward the side window. The fur along his shoulders lifted. Caleb followed his gaze, beyond the glass, through blowing snow and pine trunks black as wet ink. A pair of headlights glowed faintly on the lower track. They blinked out before the engine sound reached the cabin. Chief's growl returned low and certain, and Martha's hands began to shake harder around the box. The blizzard thickened around the cabin until the windows were no longer windows, but pale squares of moving white, each one pulsing with wind. Inside, Caleb turned the stove damper, fed 2 splits of dry larch into the fire, and brought heat up fast without making the room smoky. Arthur Bennett sat near the stove with a blanket pulled over his shoulders. A former carpenter with white, thinning hair, a lean frame, and large hands that still looked capable of building a porch straight enough to shame younger men. His skin had the gray cast Caleb did not like. Not death gray, not yet, but the color of a body doing sums it could not afford. Martha Bennett, silver hair pinned low and messy from the storm, kept her wet boots together under the chair and her tin box in her lap. She was small, with a kind face sharpened by weather and shock, and though she trembled, her eyes remained awake. Caleb set a mug of warm water, not coffee, into Arthur's hands. "Small sips. Don't argue." Arthur looked at the mug, then at Chief, who sat nearby like a quiet deputy. I take it the dog enforces medical orders. Only the ones I agree with, Caleb said. Martha gave a thin laugh, and the sound did something good in the room. Not enough. Enough to prove she was still there. Caleb checked Arthur's pulse at the wrist, counted without looking like he counted, then pressed 2 fingers to the old man's chilled hand and watched the tremor. Chest pain? Arthur's pride answered first. No. Martha's grief answered second. Yes. Arthur closed his eyes. Martha. Don't Martha me, she said, gentle but firm. You have been lying to doctors since Nixon was president. Caleb nearly smiled. Chief huffed through his nose. Arthur surrendered by taking another sip. A little tight, comes and goes. History, Caleb asked. Mild heart attack 6 years ago, Martha said. He says mild like it was weather. Caleb opened the first aid kit, took out a thermal wrap and a pulse oximeter and worked with calm hands. Calm helped people breathe. Panic made them spend oxygen on imagination. Tell me what happened before the car died. The old couple looked at each other, and in that look, Caleb saw a whole house full of things they had not wanted to say aloud. Martha's fingers moved over the lid of the tin box. Our son Greg came over this afternoon. Our daughter Denise, too. They said the storm made it unsafe for us to be alone. They said we needed to sign some papers so they could manage things. Arthur stared at the fire. They did not say manage. They said protect. His voice had sawdust in it, dry, old, rough. It sounded better that way. Martha nodded. The papers were for selling our home. We knew enough to read the first page. Greg said we were confused. Denise said I was making Arthur anxious. Then they took his keys. She paused, swallowed. And for a moment, she was not in Caleb's cabin, but back in the room where her children had decided love could be used as a lock. I had hidden the spare key in my sewing basket. Arthur looked at her with weary admiration. 48 years married, and she still has storage spaces I don't know about. A lady needs some mystery, Martha said. Her smile shook and vanished. We got out through the kitchen door. We thought we could reach Naomi at the church, but the road was already bad. The car slid, then coughed, then stopped near the lower bend. We saw your porch light through the trees. Caleb listened, but his eyes moved to the old phones beside his equipment. Neither would power on. He checked the charging port on Martha's, dried it with a cloth, tried a backup battery pack. Nothing. Arthur's did the same. Caleb then turned his own receiver to the local sheriff frequency. Static whispered, rose, and flattened. He adjusted the dial, narrowed the band, checked the antenna feed. The meter needle pulsed in a pattern that made his stomach go quiet. Storm static came like weather. This came like a machine breathing. You said your son told you no one would come, Caleb said. Martha flinched a little. He was angry. Words matter when people are angry. What exactly did he say? Arthur shifted. He said if we walked out, we would learn how cold the world was without family. Martha's eyes filled, but no tears fell. Then Denise said everyone would think we wandered because we were old. A log settled in the stove with a soft pop. Chief stood and moved closer to Martha, not asking permission. He sniffed the cuff of her coat, then the edge of the scarf tucked at her throat. His body changed. Subtle. Shoulders higher, ears forward, tail still. Caleb crouched beside him. What have you got? Chief sniffed again and looked toward the door. Caleb leaned in and caught it too faint beneath wool and snow. Diesel fuel. Expensive men's cologne. Cold metal. Someone grabbed you, Caleb said. Martha touched her wrist. Under the damp sleeve, a bruise was beginning to darken. Arthur saw it for the first time and went very still. "Who?" Caleb asked. Martha took too long. That was answer enough. "Greg," Arthur said. The name did not come out angry. It came out broken. Caleb rose and crossed to the window. He did not stand in front of it. He stood beside it, clearing a finger-width of frost near the edge. The headlights were gone, but the lower track held a smear of darkness where a vehicle had stopped among the pines. Snow would cover tire marks quickly, yet not that quickly. He could feel the old rhythm returning in him, the one he had spent years trying to quiet. Count entrances, count people, count seconds. Outside, the wind roared down the slope, but underneath it came a short cough of an engine turning over, then silence, as if someone had remembered noise could betray them. Arthur heard it and stiffened. Martha pulled the tin box against her chest. Chief placed himself between the Bennetts and the door, and Caleb reached for the second flashlight, the one with the red lens. Caleb did not tell them everything he suspected, because suspicion could crowd a room faster than smoke. But he changed the room around them. He moved Arthur's chair away from the line of the front window, placed Martha behind the heavy table, and set 2 mugs on the stove shelf where the warmth would keep them from cooling too fast. Small acts, necessary ones. Arthur watched those movements and seemed to understand that a stranger was building a wall without saying the word wall. "Greg has a friend," Arthur said suddenly. "Dale Harker. Big fellow. Always smells like fuel and peppermint gum. He helped Greg install cameras at a storage unit last year." Martha turned toward him. "You never told me that." "I didn't want to start another argument." The old confession sat there, sad and ordinary. Caleb nodded toward the tin box. "Anything in there worth following you through a storm?" Martha opened her mouth, then closed it. Chief's head snapped toward the lower window before she could answer. A red pinpoint blinked once beyond the glass, tiny, artificial, and gone. By 8 o'clock, the mountain had lost all edges, and the snow erased distance so completely that even the nearest pines looked like guesses. Caleb lowered the cabin lights until the windows no longer shone like invitations, and moved through the room with a quiet economy that made Arthur watch him with troubled respect. He checked the deadbolt, the upper slide lock, the reinforced hinge plates, the kitchen door, the cellar latch, then the little window above the wood box. Chief padded behind him, nails clicking once in a while on the plank floor, his sable coat catching the stove light in dark gold and black. Martha sat with the tin box on the table, now both hands resting on it as if it might float away. Arthur had color back in his face, but the muscles in his jaw kept jumping. Shame was working on him. Caleb recognized it. Shame had sat with him after a night on Blackwater when a teammate did not come home. It had told him he should have been faster, sharper, better than weather and fate. Shame lied well. "You don't have to explain everything tonight," Caleb said, marking the lower road on his map. Arthur gave a dry laugh. "That's kind, but people who knock on a stranger's door half-frozen usually owe a little explanation. You owe me the truth that keeps you alive. The rest can wait." Martha looked at Caleb, then really looked and saw that he meant it. Her shoulders lowered a fraction. "Greg found out about the letter," she said. "What letter?" "From an attorney in Kalispell. Naomi helped me send copies. It cancels the power of attorney Greg convinced Arthur to sign last spring." Arthur's face darkened with humiliation. "I thought it was for banking after my heart trouble. He brought it after church, said it would make things easier." "And it did," Martha said softly. "For him." Caleb did not comment. He drew a square for the cabin, a line for the porch, another for the slope where a person could approach under cover of trees. "Where is the letter now?" Martha tapped the tin box. "Original in here. Copies with Naomi. One scanned and emailed if the Lord and the internet were both awake that day." Arthur managed a tired smile. "The Lord was. The internet took its time. Caleb's mouth twitched. Small humor, small heat. Both mattered. In Whitefish, Naomi Pierce stood alone in the church office with her coat still buttoned and snow melting from the hem onto the old linoleum. She was a widow with short silver hair, a small cross at her throat, and the sort of steady hands that had made casseroles, bulletins, and emergency phone trees for half the county. At 7:45, she had expected Martha's check-in call. At 7:55, she had told herself the storm was slowing the line. At 8:05, she stopped pretending. She called Martha. Nothing. She called Arthur. Nothing. She called the Bennett house. The phone rang until a machine picked up in Greg's smooth, recorded voice, which Naomi had never liked and had always repented for not liking. Then she called Sheriff Angela Whitaker. "I know families argue," Naomi said when the sheriff answered. "This is not that. Martha was scared, Angie. Not dramatic scared. Real scared." Sheriff Whitaker listened, and Naomi heard paper move, a chair scrape, the shift from friend to law. "Send me what you have," Whitaker said. "I already did." Naomi looked at the old computer screen where the email sat open. Power of attorney cancellation notes from Martha, and pictures of bruises she said came from Greg grabbing her last month. Back at the cabin, Caleb was discovering the same kind of seriousness from a different direction. He tuned the receiver lower, then higher, sweeping through channels that should have carried weather chatter, plow reports, sheriff traffic, even stray trucker talk from the highway. Each signal rose, warped, and dropped behind a soft, pulsing interference. "This isn't only the storm," he said. Arthur looked toward the window. "Can somebody do that?" "Yes." "Would my son know how?" "Maybe not. Does he know someone who would?" Martha's face tightened. "Dale Harker, Greg's friend. He used to repossess cars, then security systems. I never trusted him." Arthur rubbed his hands over his face. "I let him in my house." The sentence hurt more than anger. Caleb set the receiver down. "Arthur, look at me." The old man did. "People who plan harm look for trust. That is on them." Arthur's eyes shone, but he nodded once. Not healed, not yet, but braced. Caleb took his parka from the peg and slung it on. Martha straightened. "You're going out?" "Porch only." Chief stood instantly. Caleb pointed 2 fingers toward the stove. "Stay." Chief disagreed with his whole body. "Stay," Caleb repeated softer. The dog held furious but obedient. Caleb opened the door only wide enough to slip through, and the cold struck him like a thrown board. Snow filled his collar, stung his cheek, and hissed across the porch planks. He crouched near the steps and swept his red light low. Tire tracks below, 2 sets, mostly filling. Footprints near the porch rail. Fresh. He followed them with the beam along the side of the cabin, careful not to lean far enough to be grabbed. 1 set circled toward the woodbox. Another stopped beneath the side window. A 3rd, heavier print, angled toward the electrical panel. Caleb kept the light still, memorizing, spacing, depth, direction. Snow covered departure fast, but not all of it. Here was the thing that made the back of his neck tighten. Several prints came in close, but he saw no clean trail leading away. He went back inside, locked the door, and stamped snow from his boots. "Company," he said. Arthur went pale. Martha whispered a prayer so quietly it sounded like breath. Chief's eyes never left the side wall, and somewhere beyond it, under the long white hush of the storm, a board creaked, where no board should have moved. Caleb held up one hand before either Bennett could speak. The board outside creaked again, then stopped, and the stop was worse than the sound. Wind wandered. Snow hissed. Somewhere close, leather brushed wood with the faintest scrape. Caleb guided Arthur lower without touching him hard enough to bruise pride, then gave Martha a look that sent her fingers back around the tin box. "No lights," he mouthed. Martha nodded. Arthur's face was tight with the effort of not asking questions. Caleb moved to the frost-rimmed window beside the stove and angled the red flashlight against the floor instead of the glass, using reflection to catch what direct light would miss. For 1 second he saw it. Not a full face, only the pale suggestion of a cheek and the dark hollow of an eye beyond the ice-crusted pane. Then it vanished. Chief did not bark. He simply placed one paw forward, and every hair on his back rose. Caleb felt the old training settle more fully into his bones, but he also felt something quieter underneath it, a responsibility that did not come from rank or orders. These two had not chosen his door because they knew who he had been. They had chosen it because it was lit. That mattered. Arthur seemed to read some part of that on his face. "If they ask for us," the old man whispered, "don't let my voice fool you. I may want to answer." Martha reached for him in the dark. Caleb nodded once. "Then I will remember for you." The snow climbed past the porch steps and packed itself against the cabin like the mountain was trying to seal everyone inside. Caleb moved the table 6 inches from the window, not enough to look defensive from outside, enough to change the path of anyone coming through glass. He worked by red light and stove glow, pulling paracord from a drawer, tin cups from a crate, and 2 short lengths of copper pipe from a shelf beside the workbench. Arthur watched the knots with a carpenter's admiration and a frightened man's need to understand. "You do this often?" he asked. "Tie cups to my porch in a blizzard?" Caleb looped the line low along the porch rail. "Only on special occasions." Martha made a sound that might have become a laugh if it had not met sorrow halfway. "I hope you don't expect a hostess gift." "Surviving is plenty." Chief stood at the center of the room, head moving as Caleb moved, displeased with every plan that put Caleb near a door. When Caleb came back in from setting the warning line, the dog pressed his shoulder against Martha's knee. She looked down in surprise. "Well, hello there." Chief did not wag. He leaned, solid and warm. Martha's hand hovered over his head, asking without words. Caleb nodded. She rested her fingers lightly in the thick fur between Chief's ears, and the dog's eyes softened just a little. Arthur watched them, and his face changed in a way Caleb understood. A man could endure insult to himself longer than insult to the woman beside him. Seeing her comforted by a stranger's dog in a stranger's cabin told Arthur exactly how far from home they had been pushed. "Denise said we didn't need the house anymore," Martha said, still touching Chief. "She stood in my kitchen under the picture of her first birthday and told me 2 old people don't need choices. She said choices make us anxious." Arthur shut his eyes. "She said I was confusing you." "No," Martha said. "She said you were confused and I was stubborn. I suppose she wanted equal opportunity cruelty." Caleb tied off the inside cord to a nail near the door. "What did Greg want signed tonight?" Martha opened the tin box. Inside were folded legal papers, an old photograph of Arthur and Martha in front of a half-built porch, a wedding picture, a pill bottle, 2 keys taped to an index card, and a small envelope marked Naomi in careful handwriting. Martha lifted the top document with reverent fingers. "Warranty deed, sale agreement, a medical statement I never saw a doctor sign. He said if Arthur signed, we could all stop fighting." "That phrase," Arthur said bitterly, "stop fighting," as if being robbed is a disagreement. Caleb looked at the papers but did not touch them. "Keep those dry. Keep them close." In town, Naomi was doing exactly that in another form. The church office printer groaned as it pushed out copies of Martha's emails, the scanned revocation photographs, and notes Naomi had written during months of small, worrying conversations. Sheriff Whitaker arrived in a county parka dusted with snow, her face lined by years of hard roads and harder decisions. She read standing up. That told Naomi everything. "I should have called sooner," Naomi said. "You called when you knew," Whitaker answered. "Guilt doesn't shovel roads." Naomi looked through the office window. The parking lot had vanished under white drifts, and the church sign that usually announced Sunday service now wore a thick hat of snow on every letter. They made a plan. Martha promised to call me at 8 if they got out. If she did not, I was to assume Greg had found the papers. Whitaker folded the copies and slid them into a waterproof pouch. Do we know where they went? Toward the North Ridge, maybe. Arthur mentioned seeing a cabin light once when they drove that road years ago. Whitaker looked up sharply. Caleb Mercer's place. You know him. He trains rescue volunteers on radio discipline. Quiet man. Good dog. Naomi closed her eyes a second, and gratitude crossed her face like a candle being lit. Then maybe God put the light where it needed to be. Whitaker did not argue. Some nights even sheriffs left room for Providence. Back on the mountain, Caleb checked the weather band again and got the same pulsing interference. He went still, listening through static. Outside, the tin cups trembled once. Not wind. Too brief. Chief heard it too and moved between Martha and the front wall. Arthur reached for the poker beside the stove. Caleb gave him a look. If it gets to that, swing low. Knees don't have pride. Arthur blinked, then nodded. I built stairs for 50 years. I know knees are unreliable. Good. Martha looked from one man to the other. Men discussing knees at a time like this. Very comforting. Ma'am, Caleb said. In winter combat, knees are policy. She laughed. Then one small burst, and the fear in the room shifted enough to breathe around it. Then a voice came through the storm, close to the front door, gentle as a church usher and twice as false. Dad! Mom! Open up, it's Greg. We just want to take you home. Arthur's hand clenched around the poker until his knuckles whitened. Martha's fingers locked on Chief's fur. Caleb turned off the last visible lamp, leaving only stove glow. Greg's voice came again, sweeter now. You're scaring everyone. Come on out before this stranger makes things worse. Chief lowered his head and growled at the door, not loudly, not wildly, but with a promise that had weight. Greg waited for that promise to frighten the room into obedience. When it did not, his voice hardened around the edges. Dad, remember Emily. You want your granddaughter hearing that you wandered off and got yourself killed because Mom filled your head with nonsense. Arthur swallowed. Emily's name found him. Caleb saw it strike. Martha saw it too and shook her head once, a small motion full of years. He is using what you love, she whispered. Arthur's eyes closed, then opened clearer. Then he has finally run out of his own. Denise snapped from somewhere beyond Greg. Naomi cannot help you. No one is coming up this road. Caleb moved closer to the door but kept his body clear of the frame. If this is a welfare check, leave your weapons, your fuel can, and your friend at the tree line. We will wait for the sheriff together. Dale laughed in the dark, a short, ugly sound. A moment later, from the side wall came a metallic click that did not belong to weather. The lights flickered once, then steadied, and Greg's shadow shifted across the frosted slit like a man changing masks. Caleb reached the radio shelf without taking his eyes from the door and quietly switched the battery recorder on. Talk all you want, he said through the wood, but talk clearly. Denise cursed under her breath outside. Arthur looked at Martha, ashamed that proof had become necessary between parents and children. Martha took his hand and held it flat on the tin box. This is not our shame, she said. The lights flickered a second time longer now, and Chief turned his head toward the side wall where Dale had gone. The storm pressed its face against the cabin, and the porch beyond the door vanished behind a curtain of white. Greg Bennett stood somewhere in that whiteness, with the patience of a man pretending patience was love. Dad, he called. I know you're cold. Mom, honey, you too. Let's stop this before somebody gets hurt. The word honey made Martha's hand tighten on Chief's fur. Caleb did not move toward the door. He stood to the side where the angle gave him cover and a narrow line through the viewing slit. Greg was outside, in an expensive dark parka dusted with snow, his hair slick under a knit cap, his face arranged into concern. Beside him stood Denise, square-shouldered, cheeks red from wind, one hand tucked deep into her coat pocket. Farther back, half hidden near the porch steps, a broader man shifted his weight in heavy boots and looked not at the door, but toward the cabin's electrical box. Dale Harker. Caleb knew the type before the name settled. Men like that measured houses by weak points. Greg lifted both gloved hands. Mr. Mercer, right, we don't want trouble. My parents are confused. They took a car in a blizzard. We're grateful you found them, truly, but this is a family matter. Arthur made a low sound in his throat. Martha whispered, "Do not answer him." Caleb glanced at her. "Wasn't planning to." Greg continued, voice smooth. "My father has a heart condition. My mother gets worked up. She hides things. She thinks people are against her." Denise stepped closer and her voice cut through the wind harder than Greg's. "Mom, you have the box. We know you do. Bring it out and we can go home." Martha closed her eyes. Arthur stared at the floor like a man looking down through ice. "Martha," Greg said, "don't make Dad suffer because you want to prove a point." Caleb saw Arthur flinch. That was Greg's aim then, not the lock. The old man's love. Caleb leaned toward the panel and spoke just loud enough to carry. "They are warm. They are safe. Sheriff's office has been notified." Dale's head moved a fraction. Greg's smile thinned. "Phones are down. Roads are closed. No need to involve anyone." "Then leave your number and I'll have them call when the storm clears." "You don't understand. They are not competent to make decisions." Martha rose and Chief rose with her. She looked frail in Caleb's blanket, snow water drying at the hem of her dress, but her voice held. "I am competent enough to know when my son is lying." Silence hit the porch so sharply Caleb could feel it through the wood. Denise's face hardened. "Mom, stop embarrassing yourself." Arthur pushed up from the chair. His hand went to the table not because he meant to lean, because his body betrayed him. "Don't talk to your mother like that." The words were not loud. They were the first plank laid across a hole. Greg turned his face toward the viewing panel. "Dad, come on. You know how she gets. You always said she could worry the paint off a barn." Arthur's mouth opened. It would have been easy, so easy to follow the old path. Laugh a little, smooth things over, protect the child by pretending the parent had misunderstood. Caleb watched the battle happen behind the old man's eyes. Martha watched too, not pleading, just waiting. Arthur closed his mouth. Then he said, "I said that because your mother saved receipts, wrote down birthdays, and kept this family from forgetting its own name." Chief gave one short huff, as if approving the testimony. Caleb almost looked at him. Greg's hands dropped. "Enough!" The gentle sun was gone so fast, the air seemed colder. Dale moved toward the side of the cabin, and the tin cups on Caleb's low line gave a faint clink, clink, clink. Chief's growl sharpened. Caleb stepped to the radio shelf, clipped a small earpiece in, and heard the same pulsing static. "Dale," he called, still calm. "The panel is reinforced. You can cut the house power, but you won't cut the stove, the batteries, or my patience." Dale froze for half a beat. That told Caleb he had been right. Denise said something to Greg that the wind tore apart. Greg raised his voice. "Mr. Mercer, if you keep two elderly people from their legal caregivers, that becomes a problem for you." Caleb reached for the weather log and wrote the time. Threat recorded. "Recorded on what?" Greg snapped. "Memory." Arthur let out a laugh before he could stop himself. It was brief, surprised, and it embarrassed him, but it gave Martha back a little color. Denise's eyes went flat. "Dad, you think this is funny? You think running to some veteran in the hills will save you from reality? You can't take care of that house. You can't take care of yourselves. You can't even drive in snow." Martha answered before Arthur could bleed from that one. "We drove away from you. That was the safest thing we did all day." Dale moved again. Caleb heard the scrape of metal, then a hard pop from the side of the cabin. The overhead light died. The small hum of the refrigerator stopped. Darkness folded over the room, leaving only the stove's red mouth and the faint glow from Caleb's battery unit. Martha gasped. Arthur reached for her. Chief moved without being told, placing his body in front of both of them, ears high, head low. Outside, Greg said, "Now let's be reasonable." Caleb took the red lens flashlight from his belt and clicked it on, washing the room in a low, blood-colored glow. "Reasonable just got colder," he said. In the sudden dark, Chief turned toward the side window and barked once, a hard, clean sound. Something tapped the glass from outside, testing it, patient and close. The tapping came again, slow and deliberate, traveling along the small pane as if someone outside were learning the window by touch. Caleb held his breath and listened through the cabin itself. The house spoke in little ways. Cold, shrinking nails, wind rubbing snow under the eaves, a wire outside ticking against siding. Beneath that, he heard metal on glass. Dale was not trying to break it yet. He was measuring. Arthur looked toward the sound and then at the deed in Martha's lap, and memory crossed his face with cruel timing. "Greg was 7 when I taught him to plane a board," he said. "He cried because the first shaving tore." Martha's voice was soft. "You told him rough grain still had use." Arthur nodded once, and whatever grief rose in him did not drown him. "I wish he had believed that about people." Chief edged toward the side wall, nostrils working. His lips lifted. A tiny white line opened across the glass, thin as a hair, and the cabin seemed to hear it before anyone else did. Caleb lifted one finger for silence and pointed Arthur back toward the stove side of the table. Arthur obeyed, but his eyes stayed on the cracked pane as though he could hold it together by looking. Martha slid the tin box under the blanket in her lap and whispered a verse she had learned as a girl. The words barely sound, the rhythm steadying her hands. Chief's paws spread on the planks. Snow blew against the glass from outside, and the little crack lengthened another inch, waiting for the hand behind it. The cabin did not panic when the power died. Caleb had built it against long winter moods and the habits of failure, and now every quiet preparation showed itself like a friend arriving on time. He lifted a lantern from beneath the sink, twisted it on low, checked the battery station, and pulled a folded thermal screen across the largest window to keep the stove heat from bleeding into the glass. The room glowed red and gold, half workshop, half chapel, with snow scratching at the walls like fingernails. Arthur sat again because Caleb told him to sit, though the old man's pride paced inside him. Martha knelt by the tin box and tucked the papers into a waterproof sleeve Caleb handed her. "You have sleeves for legal papers?" she asked. "Maps," he said. "Tonight they got promoted." Martha smiled, despite everything. Her hands still shook, but she moved with purpose now, and purpose warmed people in ways blankets could not. Outside, Greg began to pound on the door with the heel of his hand. "Dad, listen to me. This man has no right to keep you there. Mom is making you do this. She has always made things harder than they need to be." Arthur closed his eyes. Caleb saw his lips move, counting breaths. "Good." "Arthur," Caleb said quietly, "tell me where the pain is now." "Still tight, not worse." "Scale?" 4. Martha looked at him. 6. Arthur sighed. 5 then. Marriage is a poor place for secrets. Chief moved toward the side wall and sniffed the baseboard. The fur along his spine lifted. Caleb pointed to a spot behind the stacked firewood, the safest angle from the windows. "Martha there, Arthur next to her. Keep low if glass breaks." Denise's voice cut in from outside, carrying a bitterness that seemed older than the storm. "Mom, you sent those papers to Naomi, didn't you? You think that old church secretary can fix this? She has no idea what you've done to us." Martha stopped moving. Pain crossed her face, then something steadier replaced it. "I know what you did to yourselves," she whispered, though Denise could not hear. In Whitefish, Naomi Pierce was very much trying to fix it. She sat in the passenger seat of Sheriff Whitaker's truck, seatbelt tight over her church coat, a folder clutched in both hands. Snow hammered the windshield so hard the wipers seemed to be working by faith alone. Whitaker drove with both hands, jaw set, eyes moving from road to mirror to radio. The county dispatcher came through broken and distant. "Northridge Road reports drifting. Plow turned back at mile marker 6. Whitaker thumbed the mic. "Copy. Checking welfare under suspected elder abuse and coercion. Possible hostile family members. Keep trying Caleb Mercer's landline." Static answered. Naomi looked toward the dark road ahead. "Martha told me she was afraid Greg would call her confused." "That's common," Whitaker said. "Make the victims sound unreliable before anyone hears them." Naomi's mouth tightened. "Victim. I kept saying friend. Maybe that was easier." Whitaker softened without taking her eyes off the road. "Friend is why you noticed." At the cabin, Caleb tuned the receiver again and narrowed the signal until the interference became almost musical in its ugliness. A repeating pulse, low power, close range. Not military grade, but enough to muddy phones and handhelds in a snowstorm. He marked a circle on the map east of the cabin. Jammers outside, east side or lower slope. Arthur frowned. Jammer, like in spy movies. Cheaper and less charming, Martha said. Dale would enjoy owning something illegal with buttons. "Where is the road from here?" Arthur asked. "Downhill south." Caleb drew with the pencil. "Creek bed to the west, old pump shed below that, Forest Service spur beyond it." Martha looked at the map. "Can help come that way?" "If they know it." Caleb did not add that if the snow kept building, knowing might not be enough. The tin cups outside clinked again, louder this time. Then one fell and rolled across the porch boards with a hollow rattle. Chief lunged halfway to the door, stopped on Caleb's hand signal, and shook with the effort of obedience. "Good boy," Martha whispered. The dog did not look back, but his ear flicked. A sharp crack split the side window. Not the large pane, the small high one above the wood box. Glass sprayed inward in tiny, cold stars. Martha ducked. Arthur reached for her. A gloved hand shoved through the broken space and felt blindly for the latch below. Caleb moved before the hand found it. He caught the wrist in both hands and drove it upward against the frame, not breaking it, close enough to educate. The man outside cursed. Caleb twisted, pinning the arm. "Wrong window." Dale's muffled voice snarled back. "Let go!" "You first." Chief barked once, furious, teeth flashing in the lantern light. Martha cried out Arthur's name as Arthur tried to stand, and that movement pulled Caleb's attention for half a second. The arm ripped free, leaving torn fabric and a smear of blood on the broken glass. Caleb stepped back, slammed a board across the opening, and wedged it with a split log. Snow blew through the cracks in little white bursts. Outside, Greg shouted something at Dale. Denise's voice rose over his panicked now. Caleb turned to Arthur. The old man was standing, one hand pressed to his chest. His face had gone pale again. "Sit down," Caleb said, and this time the command came with steel. Arthur sat. Martha gripped his hand with both of hers. Caleb looked at Chief, then at the map, then at the west wall where the narrow wood tunnel dropped toward the covered stack behind the cabin. The plan he had hoped not to need began to unfold in his mind. Chief looked at him and knew. Caleb did not like the west hatch. That was why it was useful. It was cramped, half hidden behind split wood and miserable in deep snow, which meant a person in a hurry would not expect an old woman to use it. He pulled the tarp aside only enough for Arthur and Martha to see the dark rectangle. "That route drops behind the wood stack, then toward the creek. The pump shed is low and ugly. Good things often are." Martha stared at the hatch, then at Arthur, and her face showed every argument she wanted to make. Arthur saw them and answered before she could begin. "You keep the papers away from Greg." "You keep breathing," she said. "I am trying to make that a habit." Chief came to the hatch, sniffed the gap, then looked at Caleb. Not eager. Ready. Caleb rested 2 fingers against the dog's scarred ear, their old signal for careful work. Outside, another blow hit the boarded window, and a man's boot scraped for purchase below it. Caleb stopped hoping the night would slow down. He gave Arthur the recorder and pointed to the red light. "If Greg talks, let him." Arthur closed his fingers around it with the care of a man holding something sharper than a tool. Martha wiped her eyes, then squared her shoulders. Caleb saw the fear stay in her face, but he also saw obedience to something larger than fear. Chief pressed his muzzle into Caleb's palm once, quick and hard, the closest he came to asking if this was truly the plan. Caleb scratched the torn ear. "Take her," he whispered. Snow piled against the west side of the cabin in a long, pale drift, high enough to hide the low service hatch Caleb used for hauling firewood during bad weather. Inside, the broken window hissed cold through the patched board, and Arthur's breathing had become too careful, each inhale measured as if you were paying for it. Caleb crouched beside him, checked his pulse again, and placed the old man's hand around a small emergency oxygen canister from the kit. "Short breaths. In through the nose. Don't fight the air." Arthur tried to glare. It was not his best work. "You boss everyone like this. Only people I intend to keep alive." Martha touched Arthur's cheek. "Then be grateful, dear. At our age, intentions are practically romance." Arthur laughed once and winced, but the laughter did him good. Chief stood at Caleb's shoulder, every muscle aimed at the front door. Outside, Greg's voice had changed. No more sugar. He barked orders at Dale, then tried again to sound tender. "Dad." "Mom, this is getting dangerous. That man is armed. He hurt Dale. Come out now and I won't press charges." Martha looked at Caleb. "Can he do that?" "He can say words." Caleb moved to the west wall and pulled aside a hanging tarp, revealing the low hatch. Beyond it lay a sloped tunnel of stacked wood and snow roof, narrow, ugly, but passable for someone small and determined. Martha understood before Arthur did. "No." Arthur turned toward her. "Martha." "No." She held the tin box against her chest. "I am not leaving you." Arthur's face crumpled just for a moment under love and fear and 48 years of morning coffee bills paid, grandchildren held arguments forgotten, and ordinary days they had not known were treasures until this night tried to steal them. Then he straightened as much as he could. "You are not leaving me. You are carrying the proof." Martha shook her head, tears finally rising. "The proof can burn." "You cannot." The words filled the cabin more surely than heat. Caleb looked away for a second, because some moments deserved privacy even when danger stood outside the door. Chief moved to Martha and nudged her elbow firm, not gentle. She looked down through tears. "You too." The dog nudged again. "Traitor," she whispered and kissed the top of his head. Caleb handed her a flashlight with a red lens, a small radio wrapped in cloth, and a cord tied to a whistle. "Chief will take you down the wood line to the old pump shed. Stay low. Step where he breaks snow. If you fall, hold the box to your chest and let him come back for you. Do not call out unless you have to." Martha took the items with hands that trembled less than before. "I do not run." "Good," Caleb said. "Running is noisy." Arthur reached for her hand. His fingers were cold. "You listen to that dog." "I have listened to men all my life," Martha said, trying for stern and nearly making it. "A dog may be an improvement." Arthur smiled with his eyes full. "I love you." "I know. Say something less obvious." "Bring help." She nodded. Caleb opened the hatch. Cold poured in clean and brutal. Chief squeezed through first, big shoulders lowering, then turned and waited. Martha crawled after him, tin box tucked beneath her coat. Caleb closed the hatch behind them and slid the tarp back into place. For 1 second, the cabin seemed impossibly empty without the dog. Arthur stared at the west wall as if he could see through it. "If he fails her," he said, "I don't know what I'll do." Caleb returned to the table and picked up a chair. "He won't." "How can you be sure?" Caleb set the chair down hard near the front door, making noise. Outside, Greg went quiet, listening. "Because I know him." Then Caleb began the deception. He dragged another chair across the floor, stomped twice, opened and shut a cabinet, and spoke in Martha's voice badly enough that Arthur almost forgot fear long enough to look offended. "You sound like a mule reading a church bulletin," Arthur whispered. "That's my best elderly woman under stress. Don't quit your day job." The tin cups outside jingled as someone shifted toward the wrong side of the cabin, drawn by the noise. Caleb nodded to Arthur, and Arthur found strength enough to cough loudly, then mutter Martha's name toward the room. It worked. Greg shouted, "I hear you in there!" Caleb moved to the window slit and caught a glimpse of Denise near the porch, eyes scanning uncertain. Good. Confusion bought seconds. Outside, Chief led Martha along the buried wood line, his body plowing a path through powder that reached the old woman's knees. The snow was deeper than she had imagined, the cold so fierce it seemed to bite through cloth and memory alike. She moved 1 step, then another, her breath loud in her ears. Chief stopped often, not because he was lost, but because he listened for her. Once he came back and pressed his shoulder behind her legs until she found balance. "I am trying," she whispered. Chief looked at her with what seemed like stern disappointment in human speed, then turned downhill. Halfway to the creek bed, Martha's boot punched through a crust of ice. Her legs sank to the knee. She fell sideways, catching herself with one hand, the tin box slamming against her ribs. Pain flashed white. The flashlight tumbled into the snow and went dim. Chief spun back. Above them, a shape separated from the pines. Dale Harker stepped into the narrow path, one sleeve torn, one hand bleeding, his face twisted with cold fury. "Give me the box, old lady," he said. Chief lowered his head between Martha and the man, silent now, which was far worse than barking. Dale smiled when he saw her trapped leg, and that smile did more for Martha's courage than any speech could have done. It cleared the room inside her. She was tired, frightened, cold, and old enough to know that not every person who shared your bloodline wished you well. But she was not helpless. Not while she could breathe. Not while Arthur waited above. She tightened both arms over the tin box and lifted her chin. "You tell Greg," she said, each word shaking but present, "that his father and I are not property." Dale's smile faded. He reached for her coat. Chief shifted once, a movement so small the snow barely stirred. Dale looked at the dog too late. Martha saw the big sable shoulders gather, saw the torn ear flatten, saw the discipline in him become action. The last thing Dale managed before Chief moved was a startled breath. In that breath, Martha thought of the house with the blue porch, of Arthur sanding railings in summer light, of Greg as a baby asleep against her shoulder before money and bitterness had taught him new hungers. Love did not disappear just because it had been wounded. That was the cruel part. She could love her son and still refuse him. She could grieve him and still survive him. Dale's fingers closed around the edge of her coat. Chief's body became a blur of sable and black. The world below the cabin was all snow breath and the dark ribs of pine trunks, and Martha Bennett lay half buried in the drift with one leg trapped beneath the crust. Dale Harker took 2 steps toward her, his boots punching deep, his injured hand tucked against his coat, his other hand reaching. He had expected fear to do most of the work. Men like Dale often did. They mistook age for surrender and kindness for weakness, and in ordinary rooms, that mistake could take years to reveal itself. In the snow, with Chief standing between him and Martha, it took 1 second. Dale looked at the dog and raised his arm as if to scare him back. Chief launched. He did not waste a bark. The German Shepherd drove through the powder with disciplined force, striking Dale high enough to knock balance from him and low enough to keep teeth away from the throat. Dale went down hard air, leaving him in a grunt. Chief pinned him across the chest, jaws open inches from the man's face, a deep growl vibrating through both of them. Dale froze. Snow fell on his eyelashes. "Call him off," he gasped. Martha pulled her leg free with a cry she swallowed before it could become loud. "He looks busy." Chief's ear flicked. Even now, Martha thought he might have appreciated that. She crawled to the flashlight, shook snow from it, and found the beam again. Her knee throbbed, her ribs ached, and her hands were so cold the tin box felt fused to her fingers. But Dale was down. Chief was breathing over him like judgment, and the pump shed was somewhere below. Martha pushed herself upright using a sapling. "Stay," she told Dale, because Caleb had said commands mattered, and because she had always wanted to say something like that to a bully. Chief did the enforcing. Martha limped downhill. Behind her, the dog backed off Dale only enough to circle and drive him face down into the snow with a snap near his sleeve. No bite, no waste. Just absolute clarity. At the cabin, Greg was losing the smooth edges of himself. He paced the porch, kicked snow from the threshold, and called Arthur by the childhood title he had not used in years. "Pop open the door. This is stupid. You think Mom is saving you? She is going to get you killed. She always does this, makes everything emotional." Arthur sat behind Caleb's overturned table with the lantern beside him and a hand pressed to his chest. Caleb had given him a simple role. Talk when signaled, breathe when not, stay down always. It should have been easy. Nothing about hearing your son turn love into a weapon was easy. "Greg," Arthur called, voice hoarse but steady. "Where is your mother?" Greg demanded. Caleb lifted one finger, warning. Arthur listened. That too was new. "Safe from you," Arthur said. Greg struck the door with something heavy and the frame shuddered. Denise cried from outside. "Greg, stop! If he has a heart attack, this gets worse." "It gets worse if we don't get those papers," Greg shouted back. Caleb wrote the line in the weather log. Time, speaker, words. Arthur noticed. "You really recording in memory?" Caleb tapped the small audio unit clipped beneath the table. "Memory has accessories." Arthur's face cracked into a grin that had no business appearing in such a night. "You are a strange man, Mr. Mercer." "Caleb." The old man nodded. "Arthur." The introduction came late, but it came honestly. Down at the pump shed, Martha found the door half drifted over. The building was no more than a squat wooden box near the creek, built decades earlier to shelter pipes, tools, and a hand-crank emergency radio Caleb maintained for rescue drills. Her fingers fumbled the latch and failed. She tried again. Nothing. She wanted to weep from the foolishness of a small latch stopping her when children storm and armed men had not. Then she remembered the hairpin tucked in her bun, a habit from years when church ladies judged loose hair and Montana wind judged everything. She pulled it free, bent it with numb fingers, and worked it into the old lock the way Caleb had shown her in 3 hurried motions before she left. "Lord, steady my hands," she whispered. The lock clicked. Martha nearly laughed. "Thank you. And forgive me if this is technically breaking in." Inside the shed, the air smelled of dust, cold metal, and old oil. She found the radio wrapped in canvas, the crank stiff at first, then moving. 1 turn. 2. 10. Her shoulder burned. Static coughed. She turned the dial slowly, remembering Caleb's instructions, listening for anything that was not the jammer's pulse. Above the cabin, Naomi and Sheriff Whitaker had reached mile marker 6 and found the road blocked by a fallen pine heavy with snow. Whitaker stepped out, studied the trunk, the ditch, the drift, then looked back at Naomi. "We are not getting through this way." Naomi's face paled, but she did not fold. "There is an old hunter's spur beyond St. Mark's Cemetery Road." Whitaker turned. "You know it. My husband used it when storms closed the North Road. He said it was miserable." "Miserable is open. Sometimes." Whitaker got back into the truck. "I'll take sometimes." At the cabin, Denise came close to the window, holding up a folded document in a plastic sleeve. Arthur recognized the border, the county seal, the familiar old deed to the house he had built onto year by year. Denise's face was wet with melted snow or tears. Maybe both. "Dad," she shouted, "sign the sale tonight and we all walk away. If you don't, I swear I will burn every copy I have and tell everyone Mom destroyed this family." Arthur looked at Caleb, then at the door, then at the empty west wall where Martha had disappeared. Something quiet and final settled in him. "She can burn paper," he said. "She cannot burn what is true." Outside, a gust took Denise's reply and tore it into the snow. Then, from Caleb's earpiece, beneath static and far too faint, came Martha's voice, thin as thread and alive. "Caleb, I found the radio." Martha nearly cried when she heard Caleb answer, but there was no time for the comfort of breaking down. She gave him what she knew in pieces, stopping whenever the static surged. "Dale down, jammer bag outside, Greg at door, Denise has deed, Arthur chest pain, pump shed open." She repeated the words until Caleb confirmed enough of them to matter. Chief appeared in the shed doorway, snow on his muzzle, one eye on Martha and one ear turned uphill. He did not like the smoke smell beginning to ride the wind. Martha smelled it a moment later, faint but wrong. Not wood smoke from Caleb's chimney, sharper, lower, meaner. "Caleb," she said into the radio, "I smell fuel." Up at the cabin, Caleb heard the warning and turned just in time to see Greg lift a plastic can beside the porch woodpile. Martha tried to answer again, but the radio snapped into static. She tucked it under her arm and started uphill, following the trench Chief had made every step a bargain with her knee. The dog dragged the jammer bag 3 yards, dropped. It looked back at her, then picked it up again with obvious disgust. "I agree," Martha panted. "It is a nasty little purse." Above them, the smell of fuel grew stronger, and a brief orange flicker licked against the underside of the porch rail. The pump shed crouched beside the frozen creek, while snow buried its roof and tried to pack the door shut behind Martha. She stood in the darkness with the hand-crank radio on a shelf, turning the handle until pain climbed from her wrist to her shoulder, then turning it more because the pain was honest and fear was not. Static filled the shed, rough and wet-sounding, but under it she caught pieces of human voices. A dispatcher cut in half by interference, a plow operator somewhere south of town, then Caleb, low and clear, for 3 blessed seconds. "Martha, keep the antenna high. Say only what matters." She lifted the little antenna as if she were raising a candle in church. Her breath smoked in front of her mouth. "Bennett, Caleb's cabin. Forced papers. Greg, Denise, Dale. Jammer. Arthur. Chest pain." The signal broke. She turned the crank harder. Outside, Chief growled, and Martha knew Dale was moving. She grabbed the radio with both hands and shouted toward the door. "Chief!" "Mind him." Chief did. A heavy thump followed, then Dale's muffled curse. Then silence, except for the dog's low warning. Martha should have been terrified. She was terrified, but terror she was learning did not have to be in charge. It could sit in the corner and complain while she did the next thing. At the cabin, Caleb heard enough of her message to confirm the route. He crossed to the map and marked the pump shed, the creek, and the likely position of Dale's jammer. Arthur watched from behind the table, face drawn, eyes bright with pain and purpose. "She made it," he said. "She made it," Caleb answered. He did not soften the truth with more than that. Arthur did not need a blanket of words. He needed a beam. Outside, Greg had gone quiet after Denise's threat with the deed. Quiet from men like Greg did not mean peace. It meant a new calculation. Caleb moved to the side wall and listened. Wind. Snow. Denise crying or swearing, hard to tell. Greg muttering. Then the scrape of a plastic can against porch boards. Caleb smelled it a second later, sharp and oily beneath the cold. Fuel. His body went still. "Arthur," he said, "if I say down, you get flat behind that table." Arthur's face hardened. He would not. Caleb looked at him. Arthur looked away first. That was another grief. Down in the pump shed, Martha found the canvas bag Caleb had described under the lower shelf. Spare batteries, flares, a thermal pouch, and an old laminated frequency card. The letters swam because her eyes were watering from cold, but she forced herself to read. She tuned again. This time a woman's voice came through, broken, but nearer. "This is Sheriff Whitaker Station, attempting contact with Mercer Cabin, North Ridge." Martha nearly dropped the radio. "Sheriff, Martha Bennett. I am at the pump shed below Caleb Mercer's cabin. My husband is inside. Greg has the house deed. Dale has a jammer. Please hurry." Static swallowed the reply, then spat back one phrase. 10 minutes if the road holds. 10 minutes. Martha leaned her forehead against the shelf, not resting, only marking that hope could arrive with an estimate and still feel like a miracle. On the old Hunter's Spur, Sheriff Whitaker drove with chains grinding, headlights catching walls of snow and bent branches. Naomi sat beside her with one hand braced on the dash and the other around the folder. The truck slid once, corrected, then climbed. Naomi did not scream. She did say, "Merciful heaven," with enough force to count. Whitaker glanced at her. "You all right?" "I am discovering my prayer life has range." "Keep it up." The radio crackled with Martha's voice, then Caleb's, then nothing. Whitaker pushed the truck harder, not reckless, but determined in the way winter people understand. Momentum was sometimes the difference between arrival and regret. "When we get there," Whitaker said, "stay in the truck until I clear it." Naomi looked offended. "I am 68, not decorative." "You are also carrying half the evidence," Naomi patted the folder. "Then I will be decorative with evidence." Despite herself, Whitaker smiled. The smile lasted 1 second before the road dipped and the truck bucked through a drift. At the cabin, Greg's voice rose again, no longer pretending anything. "Dad signed the sale agreement. Mom can keep her church friends. You can both have a nice assisted living place. I am trying to save us." Arthur's answer came slowly. "Save who?" "All of us." "No," Arthur said. He drew breath through the tightness in his chest. "You mean yourself?" Denise yelled, "You don't know what he owes. You don't know what people will do." Caleb turned that over. Debt. Pressure. Not excuse. Explanation. He kept his flashlight off, using only stove glow. Through a crack near the front shutter, he saw Greg bend near the woodpile with the fuel can. He was splashing the lower logs, not the wall. Smoke threat. Not murder, yet mattered less when wind chose for men. Caleb moved to the sink, soaked 2 towels from the emergency water jug, and handed one to Arthur. "Cover your mouth if smoke comes in." Arthur nodded. His hands shook. "Caleb." "Yes." "If it gets bad, you save Martha." Caleb looked at him for half a heartbeat. "That is not the order tonight." "It is mine." Caleb leaned closer, voice low. Your wife just walked through a blizzard, with my dog took down one man by refusing to quit and got a sheriff on the radio. Do not insult her by dying before she can come back and scold you." Arthur stared at him, then a laugh burst from him, painful and alive. Outside, Greg struck a lighter. The little flame bent sideways in the wind, caught the wet fuel on the porch woodpile, and coughed into smoky, orange life. For a blink, the orange flame pulled Caleb back to another winter night, another ridge, another man he had not reached in time. His brother's truck under river ice, his own hands bloody from trying to break what would not break. The old guilt rose like black water, familiar and useless. Chief was not there to nudge him out of it. Martha was not there to make some brave little joke. Arthur was behind him, trusting him with the last thin bridge between breath and collapse. Caleb let the memory come, then let it pass. "Not tonight," he said, though no one asked what he meant. He soaked another towel, killed the last visible lamp, and shifted Arthur away from the door. Outside, Greg coughed as smoke rolled back into his own face, but he did not stop. The first gray ribbon slid under the threshold and curled across the floor. Arthur saw the smoke before he smelled it, and for one heartbeat his face emptied of everything but regret. "He was never cruel as a boy," he said. Caleb wedged the towel tighter under the door. "People become what they feed." Arthur looked at the west wall toward Martha somewhere in the storm. "Then may God help him. But not through our surrender." Caleb met his eyes. There it was, the old man finding his spine in the ruins. The smoke thickened, careless and hungry. Smoke does not need much room to become cruel. It slipped under the cabin door in thin gray ribbons curled along the floor and climbed toward Arthur's chair while the storm shoved fresh air against every crack it could find. Caleb moved fast. He jammed the wet towel along the threshold, kicked the overturned table tighter against the door, and sent Arthur lower behind it with a hand on his shoulder. "Down." Arthur went down because pride had begun to learn the value of staying alive. His cough came hard, tearing through him, and the old pain seized his chest with a suddenness that changed the room. Caleb heard it before Arthur admitted it. The rhythm shifted. Breath caught, released, caught again. Martha was outside. Chief was outside. Greg was trying to smoke them out. Denise was panicking. Dale was somewhere below, pinned or wounded, but not secured. Caleb's mind arranged the facts in cold rows, and his heart, the part he trusted less in crisis, tried to shout over them. He ignored the shouting. He pulled the emergency oxygen canister closer, seated Arthur with his back supported, and fitted the mask over the old man's face. "Slow. Match me." Caleb breathed in and out where Arthur could see. Again, smaller. Good. Arthur's eyes watered from smoke and fear. "Martha," he rasped through the mask. "Moving." Caleb did not say safe because he did not know. "She is moving." Outside, Greg shouted through the door, coughing himself now. "Open it! This ends when you open it!" Caleb grabbed the radio. "Martha status." Static answered, then a scrape, a burst of breath, and Martha's voice. "Chief has something. A black bag. Dale dropped it." In the snow below the cabin, Chief had indeed found something and decided it mattered more than comfort, obedience, or Martha's opinion. The black shoulder bag lay half buried near Dale's boot prints, its side pocket blinking with a small green light. Dale. Still face down in the snow, with Chief's earlier warning fresh in his bones, had tried to crawl toward it. Chief had placed one paw on the strap and shown teeth. Discussion ended. Martha limped to the bag and saw switches, wires, a small antenna, and a battery pack. She did not understand the device, but she understood wickedness wearing hardware. "Bring it uphill if you can. Caleb said through static. Martha looked at the slope, then at her knee, then at Chief. He will not let go. Chief had the strap in his mouth now and was dragging the bag like it was an enemy flag taken in battle. Chief, Martha whispered. Drop. Chief dragged harder. Chief, please. The dog paused, glanced back, and seemed to decide that human opinions had become unreliable. He hauled the bag uphill, shoulders churning, snow flying from his chest. Martha followed, half limping, half sliding, laughing once, despite the cold, because the dog looked so offended by the incompetence of everyone around him. Fine, she said. Lead on, General. At the cabin, Caleb heard the faint return of signal as the jammer moved and tilted. The pulsing interference broke, came back, broke again. He used those gaps. Sheriff Mercer, active smoke at front porch, one elderly male with chest pain. One suspect inside perimeter 1, lower slope, one female near porch. Approach west if possible. Whitaker answered through static. Copy, 5 minutes. Do not engage unless forced. Caleb looked at the front door as Greg struck it with the handle of a tool. Define forced, he muttered. Arthur's hand caught his sleeve. Don't go out for him. Caleb glanced down. For Greg? For the fire. Caleb smelled the smoke growing thicker. The wet towel would not hold long. Flames were licking at the woodpile outside, but the snow and damp logs slowed them. If Caleb opened the front door, Greg might rush him. If he waited, smoke might take Arthur. He chose a third option because doors were for people who lacked imagination. Caleb crossed to the kitchen wall, opened a narrow vent near the floor, and fed a flexible metal duct through it toward the snowbank outside. It was meant to pull cold air in during generator use. Tonight, it became a breathing line. He positioned the intake near Arthur, then used a battery fan on low to move cleaner air across the old man's face. Not perfect. Enough. Enough was a sacred word in emergencies. A crash hit the door. The upper latch bent inward. Greg's voice came close, wild. You think I will lose everything because she hid a box? Denise screamed. Greg, stop. Sheriff might be coming. There is no sheriff, Greg shouted. There is no signal. Caleb keyed the radio, letting the now clearer speaker crackle loud enough for the porch to hear. Sheriff Whitaker's voice came through in fragments, but unmistakable. Mercer cabin units approaching from West Spur. Silence fell outside. It was a beautiful silence. Then Greg roared, and the door took another blow. This time the lower hinge splintered. Caleb moved Arthur farther back, shoved the oxygen canister into his hands, and picked up the short axe from the wood rack by the handle, not the blade. He did not look angry. Anger wasted motion. The door burst halfway inward, stopped by the table, then burst again. Snow and smoke rolled in together. Greg stepped through the broken gap with a splitting maul raised in both hands, his face red, eyes empty of every son he might once have been. Greg's boots slipped on the snow blown over the floorboards, and for one strange second, he looked like the boy Arthur remembered, off balance, furious at the world for making him look foolish. Then he tightened both hands on the maul. Give me the papers, he said. His voice had gone raw. Give them to me, and this stops. Arthur tried to rise, failed, and still lifted one hand as if he could quiet his son by fatherhood alone. Greg, look at what you are doing. Greg did not look. He looked past Arthur, toward the west wall, toward the place where Martha had vanished. She poisoned you against me. Caleb took one step from the shadows. Smoke moved around his shoulders, red light along the side of his face. One hand open, the axe handle low in the other. He saw Greg's weight shift, saw the grip tighten, saw the decision arrive. Caleb stepped forward before the maul could come down. The distance between them closed to less than 6 feet. Caleb could see melted snow running from Greg's cap, could see the tremor in his arms from cold rage and fear. A desperate man was dangerous because he had begun to mistake consequences for enemies. Arthur whispered, "Son," and the word nearly broke the room. Greg's eyes flickered, but only for a second. Then he raised the maul higher, and the last part of him that might have stopped chose not to. Caleb moved with the calm he hated needing, and the skill he had spent years trying to use only for rescue. For one breath the cabin held every life in it, between the red stove glow and the white storm pouring through the broken door. Greg Bennett came in with the maul lifted, not because he had a clear plan, but because desperation had taken the wheel and driven him past every warning sign God and common sense had put on the road. Caleb stepped toward him instead of away. That ruined Greg's timing. Men swinging heavy tools expected fear to move backward. Caleb moved inside the ark, caught Greg's wrist with both hands, turned his hips, and drove the man's momentum down toward the plank floor. The maul struck the table edge and bounced away. Greg grunted, tried to twist free, and Caleb dropped his weight through the hold until Greg's knees hit wood. No flourish, no speech, just control. Greg's shoulders strained, and his breath turned sharp. "Stay down," Caleb said. Greg tried to rise. Caleb adjusted the wrist half an inch. Greg stopped. Arthur, behind the table with the oxygen mask hanging loose, stared at his son on the floor. His face held horror, grief, and something like farewell. "Gregory," he said. The full name landed harder than the takedown. Greg looked at him, sweating in a room cold enough to see breath. "You don't understand what they will do to me." Arthur coughed, then found his voice. "You threw your mother into a blizzard." "I was scared." "So was she." The words were quiet, and because they were quiet, they cut clean. Denise appeared in the broken doorway, snow in her hair, face streaked with tears. "Let him go, please. He didn't mean for any of this." Caleb kept Greg pinned but looked at her. "Hands where I can see them." Denise raised her hands, one still clutching a folded plastic sleeve. "We needed money," she said, not to Caleb, not even to Arthur, but to the room that had become witness. "The loans, the second mortgage, the people Dale knew. Greg said if we sold the house, we could pay it back and put Mom and Dad somewhere safe." Arthur's expression hardened. "Somewhere quiet, you mean? Somewhere no one listened." Denise broke then, not gracefully. She sank to her knees in the snow blown across the threshold and sobbed with the ugly sound of someone meeting herself too late. Caleb did not trust tears during a threat. He signaled Arthur to stay low, then used a zip tie from the drawer to secure Greg's wrists. Greg cursed, struggled once, and went still when Caleb leaned close. "You are done making choices in this cabin." From the rear hatch came a scrape, then a thump, then Martha's voice, breathless and irritated. "If anyone is available, this door is rude." Caleb almost laughed. He crossed the room, opened the hatch, and pulled Martha inside. She came in, covered with snow from hat to boots, one knee dark with wet, the tin box still beneath her coat, and Chief behind her with the black jammer bag in his teeth. The dog marched in, dropped the bag at Caleb's feet with a heavy thud, and looked deeply unimpressed by human civilization. Martha saw Arthur and went to him so fast she nearly fell. He took her hands. "You came back." "Of course I came back. I had not finished being angry." Arthur pressed her fingers to his forehead. Martha looked over him with sharp eyes. "You are pale." "You are snowy. Do not change the subject." Chief pushed between them, briefly sniffed Arthur's chest, then sat with his shoulder touching the old man's knee. Caleb pulled the jammer from the bag and switched it off. The change was immediate. The radio burst open with voices. "Dispatch, Whitaker, another unit." The clear crackle of help no longer held outside by a cheap criminal toy. "Mercer, this is Whitaker. We have lights on your west side. Status." Caleb keyed the mic. "One suspect restrained inside. One female at front door compliant. One suspect lower slope with dog contact. Status unknown. Elderly male needs medical assessment. Smoke active but contained. Approach west. Martha took the mic from him before he could stop her. Her voice shook, but it carried. Sheriff Whitaker, this is Martha Bennett. I have the original revocation, the deed, and evidence that my children tried to force a signature tonight. I am of sound mind. My husband is of sound mind. We do not consent. Silence followed, then Whitaker's voice, steady and warm. Copy that, Mrs. Bennett. We hear you. Martha closed her eyes. 3 words. We hear you. They seemed to give back something the night had tried to take. Arthur turned to Greg, who lay bound on the floor, no longer raging, just small. Being your father does not mean I let you destroy your mother, he said. It does not mean I hand you our home, our names, or our last years because you are afraid. Greg looked away. Denise sobbed harder. Outside, new headlights pushed through the trees, bright and wide, sweeping over snow porch smoke and falling flakes. For one startled second, Martha's face filled with fear again. More men, more trouble. Then Chief stood, ears forward, but his tail gave one slow wag. Caleb saw it and breathed for what felt like the first time in an hour. Those are ours, he said. The headlights grew larger, then split into shapes: a sheriff's truck, a rescue rig, and a second county vehicle crawling through the snow with chains, throwing white arcs behind the tires. Red and blue light washed over the cabin walls, over Denise's raised hands, over Greg's bent head, over Martha's face as relief arrived so slowly she almost did not trust it. Naomi's voice came from somewhere beyond the beams, high and fierce. Martha Bennett, you answer me right now! Martha made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. I am here, Naomi. Well, stay that way. Even Caleb felt the cabin breathe differently then. Dale shouted from below, demanding medical help and claiming the dog had misunderstood him. Chief ignored this legal theory. Sheriff Whitaker's silhouette appeared through the broken doorway, sidearm low, eyes taking in every angle. Everybody freeze, she called. Arthur, still seated behind the table with the blanket around his shoulders, lifted one tired hand. Sheriff, I have been frozen for an hour. Whitaker's mouth twitched. Then don't thaw yet. Outside, the storm kept falling, but its power over them had changed. Deputies moved in behind Whitaker, boots crunching over broken glass and snow. One secured Greg, another guided Denise away from the threshold before her shaking legs gave out. Naomi pushed past the edge of official caution just far enough to see Martha's face, then stopped because Whitaker gave her a look that could halt traffic. I am waiting, Naomi announced with very little evidence of waiting in her posture. Martha laughed again, weak and wonderful. Caleb opened the stove damper to clear smoke, then crouched beside Arthur as the old man's breathing steadied. Chief placed himself at the broken doorway between the family and the storm, as if the job was not done until daylight said so. Morning did not arrive all at once on the North Ridge. It came pale and patient through thinning snow touching the broken porch, the scorched woodpile, the tire tracks, the trampled path to the pump shed, and the cabin that had held through the long, white night. Sheriff Angela Whitaker reached the door first, with 2 deputies behind her, and Naomi Pierce wrapped in a county blanket despite her protests. The sheriff took control without shouting. Greg was lifted from the floor and placed in cuffs. Denise was seated in the back of a cruiser, crying into her gloved hands while a deputy read her rights. Dale Harker was found below the cabin, half frozen, furious, and very eager to be protected from Chief, who watched from Martha's side with the solemn pride of a dog who knew exactly how useful he had been. The jammer went into an evidence bag. So did the forged medical statement, the sale agreement, the original deed, and the recordings Caleb had made from beneath the table. Arthur was checked by the medics, wrapped in heated blankets, and told he was going to the hospital whether he enjoyed the idea or not. I have disliked better invitations, he said, which made Martha laugh and cry into Naomi's shoulder at the same time. Naomi held her old friend for a long while under the porch roof, rocking slightly as if Martha were a child and an elder and a sister all at once. "You called," Martha whispered. "You told me to," Naomi said. "I am very obedient when frightened." Caleb stood back while statements were taken. He gave times, positions, weather conditions, and the location of the pump shed radio. He did not call himself brave. He did not need to. The room had seen him. Sheriff Whitaker came to him near the stove, where smoke still lingered faintly in the rafters. "You kept them alive." Caleb looked at Arthur, who was arguing mildly with the paramedic about whether socks counted as personal property, and Martha, who had one hand buried in Chief's thick fur. "They did plenty." Whitaker followed his gaze. "People usually do when someone gives them room to." That sentence stayed with him. By late morning, the storm moved east and left the mountains shining under a hard blue sky. The convoy descended slowly, chains clattering, engines careful, carrying the Bennetts toward warmth, doctors, reports, and the first legal steps of taking their lives back. Chief rode beside Caleb in the truck, his muzzle on the dashboard, watching the ambulance as if personally responsible for its behavior. "They're in good hands," Caleb told him. Chief's ear twitched. "Fine. Your hands too." In the weeks that followed, the story did not become simple because real healing rarely does. Arthur spent 2 nights in the hospital and came home under strict instructions that Martha repeated with more authority than any doctor. Greg and Denise faced charges for coercion, elder financial abuse, falsified documents, and reckless endangerment. Dale faced his own list, including the illegal jammer, and complained that a dog had violated his rights. Sheriff Whitaker wrote that down with admirable professionalism. The Bennett house, a white farmhouse at the edge of town with a blue porch Arthur had rebuilt twice, did not go on the market. Its locks were changed. Its accounts were protected. A court advocate helped untangle the power of attorney mess, and Naomi organized church volunteers to repair the storm damage before Arthur could sneak outside with tools and disobey medical advice. The first Sunday Martha returned to church, she walked in on Arthur's arm, and the congregation did not clap, because Naomi had warned them not to make a spectacle. They stood instead, quietly. That was worse for Arthur's composure and better for his heart. Their granddaughter Emily came 2 pews late, eyes red, hands twisting together, and waited until after service to approach. She had believed Greg's version for too long. She said so plainly. Arthur looked at Martha. Martha looked at Naomi. Naomi looked at the ceiling as if refusing to manage one more family conversation for free. Then Martha opened her arms, and Emily stepped into them. Forgiveness did not erase what had happened. It opened a door that truth could walk through. Caleb began coming to the church on winter mornings under the excuse of checking radio coverage for the building and the roads around it. Nobody believed the excuse, but they appreciated the equipment. He built a small emergency communication net between the church, the sheriff's office, the rescue team, and 3 ridge homes that lost signal every bad storm. He trained volunteers to use handsets without talking over one another, which was harder than it sounded because church committees had habits. Chief appointed himself supervisor. He lay near the fellowship hall door, sable coat shining, scarred ear tilted, accepting respectful greetings and crumbs he was not supposed to have. Martha kept a jar of approved dog treats in the kitchen and pretended not to notice when Arthur carried extras in his coat pocket. One afternoon in early spring, when snow still sat in the shadows but the creek had begun to speak again, Caleb drove Arthur and Martha back up to the cabin. They brought a pie, a new wool blanket for the guest chair, and a small brass plate Arthur had made in his workshop. Caleb opened the package and read the engraving, "The Last Door in the Snow." He said nothing for a moment. The scar near his temple paled as his jaw tightened. Martha touched his arm. "Some lights are put where people can find them." Caleb looked down at Chief, who leaned against his leg, solid and warm. For years, Caleb had believed the mountain was where he had gone to be left alone with what he could not save. That winter taught him something else. A cabin could be a retreat, yes, It could also be a lighthouse. Arthur and Martha kept their home, their names, and their choices. Naomi kept her promise and gained a story she would tell only when it helped someone else speak up. Sheriff Whitaker gained a stronger case than any rumor could have built. Caleb gained a community that did not demand speeches from him, only presence. And Chief gained more people to watch, more hands to lean against, and a reputation so large he had to carry it with the patience of a saint and the appetite of a farmhand. Sometimes the coldest storms are not made of snow. They come through family wounds, fear, shame, and the painful moment when people we trusted forget how to love us well. Arthur and Martha survived because they told the truth, accepted help, and held on to faith when the road ahead was white and unclear. Caleb and Chief remind us that God can place steady hearts in lonely places, and Naomi reminds us that one faithful friend can change the ending. If this story touched your heart, comment Amen and share it with someone who needs courage tonight. May every person facing fear find a warm light, a safe door, and someone willing to listen. Subscribe for more stories of hope, loyalty, and quiet grace.